Hey, it's Rob. Welcome to Axel's Garage. Today we're out here. We got nice weather. It's got to be like 60 degrees, which is a first in the Northeast today. Really nice. Last night it was cold and windy, and we woke up this morning. It's a little windy, but it's sun's out. It's really nice, which means my wife is going to start making me do stuff around the house for the spring. So I got to get some work done on the Big Dummies Blazer before she starts in with my honeydew list. So we're continuing along on our sort of like a little bit of a modified resto, let's call it. Let's see where it goes. But what we're doing is we're making sure that the Blazer runs well and handles well and everything works so that he's got a reliable vehicle to drive around in. We started working on the back. If you haven't been following along, I'll put a playlist up here somewhere and you can see what we've been doing so far on the Blazer. We did the rear brakes and the wheel spaces, and now we're doing the shocks in the back. So I ordered Monroe Gas Magnum shocks. They are in the heavy duty line. I'll put a link to it in the description below on Amazon. They're moderately priced, around 30 bucks a shock. We bought the front and rear. This vehicle has just 2 shocks up front, 1 on each wheel, and 2 shocks in the rear. There were some options in these years where they had that quad front shock setup with 2 shocks in the front. This one doesn't have it. It comes with the hardware for your upper bolt, and you're going to reuse your hardware for your lower bolt, or you're going to buy new hardware at your local hardware store if you choose to. Depending on what his stuff looks like, we'll make a decision on that point when we take it out. It's your basic Monroe replacement shock. Nothing fancy here. Now, when you go look up shocks for these trucks, there's too many choices. It's like a lot of things nowadays. There's just way too many choices. You look, they have an economy line, then they have standard replacement line, then they have heavy duty line, then they have improved handling, and then they have performance, and the prices go anywhere from 20 bucks a shock to 150 bucks a shock. You decide what you want to put in. We just wanted to restore the ride quality that he should be getting on these trucks. And because they are leaf spring trucks, a lot of times when the shocks go bad, you don't feel it as much as you do on a coil spring where you get that excess bounce in the tire. But with bad shocks, you'll get crappy handling, you'll get a crappy ride quality, and you'll get crappy wear on your tires too. So because there's so many unknowns with this truck, and it is technically, a barn find, there's so many unknowns. We don't know the maintenance history, and when we took a look at the shocks, we saw that there was some moisture around one of those shock boots, like creeping moisture, not soaking wet, just creeping oily moisture, and that's not a good sign. I'll show you a picture of what it looked like here. All right, now you can see from that picture that there is some moisture, and that's probably a hydraulic shock, and it's seeping a little bit, and that seeping with capillary action, see, scientific term, gets around and wets that shock, and you know that shock, it's time for it to be replaced if you can't tell handling wise. Whether or not that was seeping, we were going to replace them anyway because we want to start fresh. All new brakes, wheel spaces, we got new tires on it, and we want to start fresh back there. So what we're going to do today is, well, this whole video is I'm going to be replacing the shocks, but today, in this part of the video, I'm going to take the old shock out. He's got a completely rotted, and you're going to laugh when you see it, Class 3 receiver, weight distributing receiver hitch on it that is so rotted, I don't think you could put a step on it and stand on it without it starting to come apart. It's that rotted. So we're going to pull that out of there as well. And then, yes, because I'm a car guy, and yes, because I have an illness, we are going to scrub down the underside. Now, if you remember, we already did the chassis rails out when we did the brakes. We're going to do that center section now. So we're going to scrub everything down underneath the truck that is in the area between the 2 shocks, and we're going to put a coat of protective paint on it. We're going to take that receiver hitch down. We're going to get another receiver hitch in the next video, and we actually got one with the truck, but it's bare steel, so we're going to paint that with some protective paint, and we're going to install that so that he does have a receiver hitch. The shocks, really, just go on the forums, and you decide what you want based on what people are saying on the forums. We went with a heavy-duty factory replacement. That's what we're using. It's a reasonable price. You should get a decent ride quality out of it. I just really don't see the need on a daily driver type vehicle to put, over the top, improved performance, crazy expensive shocks on it, and I don't want to put cheapos on it either, because this is his daily driver and he's going to be using it, and he's going to beat it up a little bit, I'm sure. So a heavy duty factory replacement is what I thought was made the most sense, really, price wise and in real use function wise. So I'm going to move the camera. I'll get some tools out. Trucks like this, you don't even need to jack them up to put the shocks in or out. You could, if it makes it easy if you're laying under there. We'll probably jack it up when we go clean everything out underneath. But just to get the shock out, it's pretty easy, simple hand tools. You should be able to get it right out. All right, so under the car, your view right now is above the center section of the rear end. Looking at the inside of the chassis rail, you got your fuel and brake lines running through here, and then you got this stud coming through with a nut on it that holds the shock in on the outside of the chassis rail. So that's a 15/16 nut on there, and I'm just going to put a breaker bar up on here. I don't know how tight it's going to be. If you wanted to, you could spray them down ahead of time with some penetrating oil. I chose not to do that. I want to see if I could get them out dry, purely for the purpose of less clean and oily residue away when we paint everything under here. All right, so all right, it broke free pretty easy with the breaker bar. So now I'll switch over to a ratchet. And get that nut the rest of the way off. Alright, so after a few turns with the ratchet, we're realizing that this whole stud going through the chassis rail is spinning, and there doesn't appear to be any kind of nut on the back side of this that we could get a wrench on. I'm going to try to get one on the back side. The aftermarket ones usually have more of a flat on them. This one, it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to get anything up and in on the back side to stop that whole stud assembly from moving. And I'll show you what the stud assembly looks like when we take it out of the new hardware kit. You get a new one in the hardware kit, that whole stud assembly. But this is spinning the whole assembly. That nut's not actually turning and spinning the whole stud. Alright, so if you look here on the outside of the chassis rail, you got the stud assembly that goes through the shock, and this piece right here, there's no way that I could get a wrench on. And the only thing I could do is try to put a pair of vice grips on this outside piece. If I could get a pair of vice grips on there and hold it back from spinning, then we should be able to get that nut off. If I can't, we're going to have to get the grinder out and start doing some grinding. Alright, so I got the biggest pair of vice grips that I have on the outside, holding the back end of that stud assembly. And as I turn it, it goes up into the floorboard, which holds it in place. And then on the inside, I have a breaker bar on a short extension, and that seems to be working. It's slow, but it's working. So I'm not going to screw that up, and I'm going to keep going until that comes out. Alright, you can see up between the brake lines I got the nut off. I still got my vice grip on that side, and now I'm going to work on the lower. Alright, so the reason why I left that stud going through and the vice grip on it was just to hold the shock upright. That's usually the more difficult one to get. So I like to tackle that first. That's just personal preference. You got your lower bolt here. You got your bolt side is 13/16, and your nut side, I believe, is either a 7/8 or a 15/16. 7/8. I'm just going to take the ratchet handle, put it on that, and see how tight it is. Ugh. And it wasn't too bad. Alright, so once you get that off, all you need to do is smack your bolt through. Alright, they're in there pretty good, so I'm going to get a punch and a mallet and smack them out. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is just turn that lower nut on, because This hardware looks pretty good, just needs to be cleaned up. So I don't want to damage the thread, so I turn it on until it's almost flush there. Give it a shot, just loosen it with the hammer. It's going through the rubber bushing of the shock, so it kind of punches back at you a little bit. Then just with a punch, slide it the rest of the way through, and then up top I can pull my assembly out, and then I got my, see if I can get it in the camera view, I got my upper assembly. See, this got a flat on it so that you could hold it back when you're putting it in. It's just so thin, I didn't have a wrench thin enough to fit in there. That's why I had to hold it back with the vice grips. You'll see how the new one goes in, it's a little easier. And while we're back here, you could see this real crappy, rotted trailer hitch. I mean, just completely rotted away. We'll yank this thing out of here and throw it away. Alright, so I'm going to pull that trail hitch out. I'm going to get the soapy water out. I mean, it's nice today, the hose out. I'm going to scrub everything down underneath, let it dry out for a couple days. I'll put a nice coat of paint on it, 2 coats of paint on it. Then we'll continue with the video when I'm ready to put the shocks in, and then we'll be done with this next phase or this next step in our, I don't know what we're going to call it. We should call it something. What can we call this? Redo, it's not a restoration, it's not a mod really. What do we call it? I don't know. Maintenance? Man, it doesn't sound good, maintenance. We're going to call it a mild resto. How about a mild resto? That sounds good. Yeah, we'll see. Be back in a couple days. Alright, well, I said I'd be back in a couple days, and it turned out I'm back in a couple weeks because the weather just did not cooperate with my days off. Every time I was off, it was raining, couldn't get it painted, and even after we finally got it washed and cleaned good, we went over it with a degreaser and a brush, and then we power washed it with a power washer, using another degreasing solution again, and then power washing the whole thing. We couldn't get it to dry because it just kept raining and raining and raining. So finally we got it good and dry. We got a coat of the POR or POR 15 top coat on everything we could realistically reach, laying on our back underneath. We'll touch it up a little bit and get the floor pans a little bit better when we get it up on a lift the next time. We'll just be careful to tape off some of the new components that we put in, like the shocks. But we're going to finish up those rear shocks today. Now, the new shocks and the shocks that we went with, I don't even remember now if I showed in the previous part of the video, but they're Monroe gas magnums. Right? It's a decent heavy duty factory style replacement gas magnum shock. It's not a super heavy duty, so it's not going to kill your ride, because these things have a bad enough ride as it is. And they're very reasonably priced on Amazon or Rock Auto, wherever you might want to buy them. Amazon, reasonable price, you get them shipped right away. They come with new hardware for the upper bolts only. So if your lower bolts were really rusted, really chewed up, run over to a hardware store, get some new hardware. If you're going to buy the new hardware and you're going to keep the vehicle for a while, spend the extra, couple bucks and get hardened, grade 8 hardened bolts, so this way they don't rust in there on you. Either way, when you put them in, like I always say, put a little lube on the threads, right? Just so they don't rust up, so you're nice for the next guy, because that next guy just might be you. Usually is. So what we have here is the upper bolt kit. Now you can see, I showed you in the video that this upper bolt that was in, it goes through the frame rail here and then bolts on this side. But remember, there was a real thin flat spot that they wanted you to get a wrench in. Alright, and you can see on these new upper bolts, they got a nice thick spot, so the shock will mount to here, and you can get a wrench in on there when it's time to get them out again. They also come with locking nuts, and you can see the nuts have a groove cut in them. Alright, these are locking nuts. So you're gonna, that groove is gonna go to the outside, and when you thread it on, they're gonna thread on nice, and then when they get to the last couple threads as you get them in tight, they're going to tighten up on you. I can't even turn it with my hands. And it's got locking nuts and it's got washers. And the washers on this one, you're going to have a washer on either side of your shock boot, like that. Okay? And then you're going to have a washer with a smaller hole. Okay? And that one's going to go there with your locking nut on your shock side. Okay, and now you got a washer that's going to go on this side, and then it's going to go through the frame. It's going to go through the frame rail with a washer, and then your locking nut there. I messed that washer thing up. Not really thinking. It's going to be one washer, then your shock, and then this washer, which won't go any farther than, because it's got a small hole in it. Then your locking nut for your shock, right? And then on this side, you're going to have the two of the bigger hole washers. They're going to go one on either side of the frame rail, like that. You'll have your frame rail in between there, and then your locking nut with the grooves in the nut to the outside, and you'll screw that in, you'll tighten it down. So now the easiest way to do it is just to go into your workbench, get the right wrenches, so you only got to crawl underneath the car once, and we're going to throw the shocks in. Okay, so down here on the ground, we're going to take this one, and we're going to put it in the shock hole, which is right up here. Alright, so you got this stud assembly with the washer, and then on the back side it's going to get a washer and a lock nut. Alright, the only thing I'm going to do different is I'm just going to put on the threads just a dab of white grease just to prevent corrosion, so that when we change them the next time, or if we have a problem, we got to take them out, or we decide to do something different, they won't be rusted up like those old ones were. Now, I did the one on camera on this side when I was removing them, and then I did the other one off camera, and the other one was really rusted in there. I had to use a MAP gas torch and a lot of penetrating lubricant to get them freed up and out. So I'll spin this on until I get it hand tight, or until the locking tabs click in, and then I got a wrench up on it. Alright, so once that's tight, you're going to put your washer on. I'm going to put some white grease on. Alright, and we're ready to put the top of the shock in. Hey, what's up?
What are you up to now?
Oh, putting shocks in.
Shocks. Fun.
Yeah. Alright, so you slide the top of the shock in.
What's that?
Oh no, I'm talking to the camera here.
Oh.
Washer, and then the small lock nut that'll hold the shock in. Alright, and I'm just gonna give it a couple turns, just so the lock nut engages, leaving it a little loose. This way I can finagle it over to the back end. Gives me a little wiggle room leaving it loose. Once I get the bottom end, then I'll tighten it up all the way. Alright, so on the bottom, you have the bottom bolt. I took the original bolt, took it over to the bench grinder with the Y wheel on it, and I cleaned it up that way. Now there is some different kinds of controversy about whether the bolt should go this way or go this way. I don't even remember which way they went originally, but I do remember an old timer telling me when you put suspension bolts in, always put the bolt towards the inside of the car, They say the reason why you do that is so that if it ever loosened up and fell out, the bolt, which is going to do the most damage to something down here, would fall to the inside and not get caught up in the wheel, and would only be the nut that would come down by the wheel. So that's what I've always done. There's probably a right and a wrong way. Who knows? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the washer on it, right, which it didn't originally have. It only had a lock washer. But I'm going to put it on it that way, and I'm going to take some white grease, and I'm going to coat the bolt with white grease. And then I'm also going to hit the threads with white grease as well. So you're coating the unthreaded part of the bolt so that bushing has got a little lube in it for the lower shock, and then you're coating the threads to prevent corrosion in the future. Like I always say, make it easier for the next guy, because the next guy, well, he just might be you. Alright, so now you got your bolt ready. Set your bolt aside, and what you're going to do is you're going to push the shock up, and usually you should be able to push it enough to get this connecting thing out. This one seems to be a little tight, so what I'm going to do is just snip it. It's a little bit easier, especially I'm kind of twisted under the car. You take a pair of snips, snip it. The shock wants to come out, so just hold it back as best as you can. Doesn't always work too well. This is really pushing. And try to catch it on its way back down. And at least I got it in the one side. A little bit of a wrestling match. And then you can take a little mallet, and you should be able to get, if you take some tension off of it. So once you get it caught in on one side where it holds, you just got to line up the hole on the other side. And a lot of times you can just take a wrench like this underneath and give it some taps and get it the rest of the way through. Right, and then you got your new flat washer that I added. Didn't come with flat washers. Then the lock washer. Then the original nut that I cleaned up also on the Y wheel. Alright, spin that nut on. And then hopefully you got the correct socket. And the correct wrench. Alright, you tighten it down, and the bottom's good. So now the top, cut the strap. And now we can get the nylon strap that held everything together out of the way. And then you can reach up and tighten your upper shock bolt the rest of the way. I'm sure there's a torque spec for this. I don't know what it is. I just make it good and tight. And for those of you that don't like my automotive terminology when it comes to that, too bad. Alright, so as I was putting that first shock in, the big dummy actually came home from work, and he laid down under the truck with me, which was kind of nice that he was interested in how everything went in. Hasn't always been interested in how to do the car stuff, so it was nice. And then he helped me do the other side. We got the other side in, and I never even got a chance to finish the video, because as soon as we got that other side in, took the hose out, washed the truck down because it hasn't been used in a few weeks, covered in pollen, cleaned it all up. He put the windows up on his soft top, and he just went for a drive. Didn't go anywhere in particular. He just went driving, enjoying his old truck. He's been missing it. It's been since January he hasn't driven it. So he was really excited to get in it and start going for a ride again. So we got the whole back end of the truck buttoned up. Brakes are good, suspension's good. It's painted fairly well underneath to protect everything. And now we can turn it around and focus on the front end and get his front end nice and tight, get his steering nice and tight, and so that when he takes it back to school, he'll have a nice, hopefully reliable, knock wood, K5 to drive around with at school, and he'll be enjoying himself. So that's it today from Axel's Garage. Like I said, the shocks, you don't have to break the bank doing shocks. If you got an off-road vehicle, you know, then you're gonna go for something a little bit different. But if you just got a driver that you want to have a decent ride, or as decent as something like this could ever have, you know, you don't have to break the bank. Link to everything we used in the description below. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us that thumbs up. And if you like what we're doing here at Axel's Garage, as always, subscribe to our channel. And thanks for watching.